we have a special panel planned for you today, where we have some of the world's most senior foreign policy experts joining us in a panel discussion where they'll be taking us through the current COVID crisis and what impact will it have on immigration. So, without any further ado, I would like to welcome Ambassador Peter Burley, Mr. Raman Sidhu, Ambassador Navdeep Sarna, and Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It's truly an honor to have you with us today, right now. So, before we move on to the panel, very quickly, I would like to introduce our panelists for today. And after that, I'll also introduce our moderator, Mr. Raman Sidhu, who has been very kind and very generous to have joined us in today's discussion. I'll start with Ambassador Burley. So, Peter Burley has served as an ambassador and deputy representative to the of the United States to the United Nations from August 97 until December 1999. He was in charge of the mission from September 98 to August 99. He has also represented the United States in the Security Council, the General Assembly, and at other major United Nations bodies. During his period in charge at the United Nations Security Council, he was in charge of Iraq, Kosovo, and East Timor crisis, along with many African issues. And he has also served as the U.S. ambassador to Sri Lanka and concurrently as the ambassador to Maldives, and has held senior positions from 1985 till 1987. He was also the head of department responsible for Iran and Iraq, and earlier in his career, he was the deputy director of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf and the Emirates. He has also served in United States embassies in Nepal, Bahrain, India, as well as Sri Lanka. Such a phenomenal person joining us today. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Next, we come on to Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. Ambassador Anil Wadhwa is a member of the elite Indian Foreign Services, and he's been an ambassador of India to Italy and San Marino, Thailand, Oman, Poland, and Lithuania, and has served in Hong Kong and Beijing twice, permanent mission of India in Geneva, and has worked on deputation with Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in The Hague, where he headed their media and public affairs and government relation branches. Ambassador Wadhwa was also the head of East European Division in Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi and looked after relations with Russia and Eastern European countries. As Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, he has overseen relations with ASEAN, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific, and the GCC, Middle East, and West Asia. It is my pleasure to welcome Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. Thank you so much, Ambassador Wadhwa.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next panelist, my pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to Ambassador Navdeep Sarna, who's not just a foreign services professional. He is also an author, a translator, and was also India's ambassador to the US and Israel. He also served as the High Commissioner to the Court of St. James. He was the longest serving spokesperson of the Indian Forest Ministry for 6 years under 2 prime ministers, 3 foreign ministers, and 4 foreign secretaries till the end of his term in 2008. He has served as a diplomat in Moscow, Warsaw, Thimphu, Geneva, Tehran, and Washington, D.C., and has served as India's ambassador to Israel from 2008 to 2012, High Commissioner to the UK in 2016, and India's ambassador to US from November 2016 to December 2018, and retired from Indian Foreign Services on 31st of December 2018 after serving the country for over 36 years. My warm welcome to Ambassador Navdeep Sarna.
Thank you.
And coming on to our esteemed moderator for today, someone who has a long relationship with Speaking. It is my honor, and I would like to extend my warmest welcome to Mr. Raman Sidhu, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the EBG Federation India and the National Spokesperson of the European Economic Group EEG India. He is the Independent Board Director at Ceylon Technologies Limited, Independent Board Director at Premica Food Industries, co-founder and President of Public Affairs Forum of India, Life Trustee of the Foundation for Aviation and Sustainable Tourism, Senior Advisor at TMF Group, Senior Advisor at Accord India, member of the Advisory Council of Speaking Bureau. He has in the past worked as a corporate and investment banker with Barclays Bank, Barclays with HSBC Securities, and Capital Markets India Private Limited, Fidelity Fund Management, and Deutsche Bank AG in India. Thank you so much, Mr. Sidhu, for joining us today. And I'm sure everyone here is more than excited. Everyone here is eager to listen to your kind words. I will now request Mr. Sidhu to carry the discussion forward. Over to you, Mr. Sidhu. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much. Uh, a very good day to friends. Uh, the year 2020 will remain etched in our collective memories as the time when the world was struck by the COVID-19 crisis. The magnitude of this has been such that it has negatively impacted human peace, welfare, and lives. It has also battered the economic theories and tools which have so long underpinned the world economic edifice and left us all with a lot of legitimate apprehensions of the way forward. As we, friends, traverse through these turbulent times of this virus, which has no half life and is not going to go miraculously away, it's not going to disappear in 40 days or 60 days, clanging of kitchen utensils, lighting of candles, tapasya, prayers notwithstanding. Something we have to live with and we have to move on with it. It has impacted us, as I said, in many ways, and we will come immediately to that. I will start by welcoming again our eminent and esteemed diplomat panelists on this webinar event, rightly titled Immigration Post-COVID-19, and look at the travails of Indian students, professionals, workers, NRIs, who are at the moment spread all over the world. I will start by posing questions to Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. Anil, how do you envisage the future unfolding for Indian students who after high school were to embark on a higher education or have partly finished higher education or completed this and await a job abroad? Indian students who have ignored applying to Indian colleges in this thought process and perhaps may have to pay a price. Indian students who paid high advance fees and residential costs. Indian students who were promised jobs which have or can be withdrawn. Getting on to Indians employed, but who potentially face redundancies in the countries that they are working in. Because as this crisis unfolds, as unemployment grows, there may be a preference, which to some extent is natural, where locals will be preferred. NRIs, coming to NRIs specifically, because you've served a lot in the Gulf and the Middle East, which has a large number of NRIs, they also are a source of a huge amount of remittance back home to their families for investments. Families primarily. It is 50% of the total NRI money that flows into the country year on year. Layoffs in the countries they are in, where they are getting all this money, which they keep remitting on a regular basis to the country. And the track record has been very, very good in terms of sending money back, with the sole exception of 2009-10, when we had a balance of payment problem in the country. This will be the key pain point, I think, for the Indian economy, which we know has a current account deficit which can be negatively impacted. The oil price downtrend offset notwithstanding. But at the same time, on the positive side, on the negative side, the FII inflows have been lower because the outflows have been lower, because of the negative returns that they have been getting on their investments in the country. I want to just stop for a moment, and I want to also tell Ambassador Peter Burleigh and Ambassador Navtesh Sarna that some of these questions will also apply to you, and I don't want to get into a repetition. So when your time comes, please do address these questions in the context of the countries you have served in and the Indian population that is based in those countries. Third question, NRIs in the rest of the world with European, Southeast Asian, and US family links. Due to diminishing job prospects in, say, Africa, Middle East, and Gulf, they may perhaps be looking to apply for large-scale migration to some of the countries you all have served in. What would be the attitudes of the governments in some of the developed world to these potential migration candidates? I will come to one or two specific questions as we move on from Ambassador Wadhwa to Ambassador Burle and to Ambassador Sarna. But I'll come to that later, and they will be shorter in terms of the time I have taken now. So over to you, Anil.
Well, Raman, thank you so much for inviting me to speak first. First of all, I'd like to say how wonderful it is to be here and to connect with the speaking webinar audience. Let me start by saying that we all hope that this pandemic has only temporarily severed the physical contacts in this world, for which solutions will need to be found very quickly. And also for economic reasons, I think it's important that the travel and the air industry are resuscitated. We also hope that the pandemic dies down substantially and that we find a vaccine shortly and that this phenomena will be as temporary as can be. Having said that, let me come to your question on migration, and I make two general points first, and I'll come to the specific issue about students and migrants that you raised. First of all, my first general point is that global migration is as old as history, and people have always moved for reasons of fulfilling a need in their lives, which they could not do by staying at home. So as the world has developed, therefore, there are trained technical labor, for example, which has always been in a comparative advantage. And while we talk about the movement of capital and goods and services, the movement of natural persons is also one of the four ways through which services can be supplied internationally, and that is what we call Mode 4. And, we actually negotiated a very robust agreement for that purpose. Second general point I'd like to make is that a combination of pandemic-induced recession globally and travel restrictions are bound to have a disproportionate impact on migration in the near future. That's a given. Also, countries will be less likely to open their borders in future unless they are benefited in the process or they feel safe enough to do so. So let me come from there to the point about students, which you raised. See, there are 752,000 Indian students studying in around 90 countries in the world. And close to 52% of these students are in the United States, Canada, and Australia. So if you take the breakdown of the major countries, there are about 211,000, for example, for USA, 124,000 for Canada, 87,000 for Australia. And then Saudi Arabia, UAE, New Zealand, and UK, etc., bring up the rear. And of course, there is sprinkling of students all around the world. So every year we have around 400,000 Indian students who go abroad to study. So there is no doubt that this year we'll see a very large drop in cross-border movement of students as the academic calendar gets disrupted. But that's not a phenomenon only for Indian students, it's for all students across the world. In this situation, the problem that students face in academia across the world, and again, not just faced by Indian students, although we have seen how long-distance learning can be adapted, although this is not an entirely satisfactory solution, and depends on many optimal factors. Many of them are not functioning optimally these days. So one does not know how long this pandemic will last, but I'm hopeful that the universities will not be shut for too long. Now, if they do, more solutions for distance learning will have to be found and streamlined, and the fees charged rationalized proportionately, I'm sure, sooner than later. India is also very attractive, a place for foreign universities who regularly come down over here to recruit students, as we all know. And Indian students studying abroad are also an asset to the economies where they study. So I see this only as a temporary blip for reasons which suit both sides. And let's not forget, there are also foreign students who will continue to come to India from countries like Iran, from Southeast Asia and Africa. So in my view, taking the overall picture, the number is not so large and all sides will benefit by streamlining the future of students who have chosen to study abroad this year and whose parents are currently an anxious lot. But to me, a larger issue of concern immediately is the presence of these students away from India in foreign universities or cities where they are enrolled with uncertain future of travel opening up or resumption of their classes. So this will bring about an induced isolation. It's already brought that about. and students and parents will have to learn to cope with the anxiety of a long separation, which is not very easy to overcome. Second issue that you raised was about the migrants. If you take the figures, again, India is a country with 28.2 million of its diaspora abroad. There are 12.6 million non-resident Indians, whom we call NRIs in short, and 15.6 million people of Indian origin, who are spread across more than 200 countries and territories across the world. Now, a distinction has to be made here, in my view, between non-resident Indians and people of Indian origin. A number of people of Indian origin have acquired local nationalities but have maintained family contact in India and other parts of the world. So, for the purpose of our discussion, let us confine ourselves to non-resident Indians. Now, of these, 8.9 million of them live in just 6 countries, and 70% of Indian citizens are in 6 West Asian nations. The largest number, 3.4 million now, live in the United Arab Emirates, and 2.8 million in Saudi Arabia, while Kuwait, Oman, where I had the privilege to serve, Qatar, and Bahrain are home to another 2.9 million non-resident Indians. So, in the Gulf, as they do in the rest of the world, the migrant Indians who are blue and white collar workers both fulfill a very definite need and will continue to do so. The Gulf, more than remittances, actually provided much needed jobs for the working class Indians, initially from Kerala state, but increasingly also from the Indian states of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. In the short term, I see this now as a much reduced safety valve. So until the pandemic is completely settled, however, we will see changes in the way people across the world do business. In the Gulf, of course, scaling down of industries and construction, depressed oil prices, that's a very important factor now, and changing domestic policies as a result of that will affect labor. So I do see the possibility of some retrenchment of Indians who will have to come back. Let us take the case of Kerala, which is a state in India from which most Indians migrate to the Gulf for work. And as of now, Kerala has 100,000 return immigrants who could not go back, mind you, due to the closure of airports in the Gulf earlier and in India later. Secondly, around 30,000 new immigrants could not go to the Gulf in spite of having employment visas. So they are stuck in Kerala. And given the economic downturn and the effects of the pandemic, I would hazard a guess by saying that another 100,000 perhaps could return by September. But I would say that everything is not bad news because post-pandemic, there is a lot of talk on restructuring the value chains and moving away from countries like China. The trend, of course, will be to move the production chains closer to market, as we call it. And India is expected to be one of the beneficiaries. I wouldn't say the main one, but one of the beneficiaries. And in these circumstances, if some manufacturing moves to India, it should be easier to create employment opportunities in India itself. And states like Kerala, in fact, have already started putting plans in place to absorb this labor and employ them in accordance with their skills. In countries like the United States and Southeast Asia and larger parts of Europe, a majority of non-resident Indians and persons of Indian origin are quite well qualified. So I do not see much effect except temporary difficulties for them for this lot. But I fear that contract labor in countries like Italy, engaged in mozzarella, in winemaking and horticulture industries, will come under pressure. So there are 190,000 Indian nationals or people of Indian origin who live and work in Italy, out of which at least 90,000 work on contracts in these industries. And given the impact of COVID-19 on countries like Italy, I see them coming under tremendous strain for the moment. Finally, on the issue of remittances. It is true that India, whose nationals remit $80 billion annually, has been the largest beneficiary of migration needs and globalization. But the World Bank has estimated now that remittances will shrink by about 20% globally. And remittances for India, it has been estimated, could decline by 23%. So the predicted fall in Gulf remittances will partially offset the gains to the balance of payments of India offered by lower oil prices. And North America, of course, provides another substantial segment of India's remittances.
Yes.
But as immigrants there are more middle class, these remittances, I feel, are less likely to fall. And let us not forget that though the Gulf remittances, while remaining an important foreign exchange buffer, have been declining in importance to India's overall balance of payments.
Anil, on that note, we'll have to shift. We're running out of time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Over to Ambassador Peter Burley, and we're talking of North America, so I thought that's an appropriate time to move over to you in Lauderdale and Fort Lauderdale. So, given all this somewhat gloomy, of course, Anil has tried to cover all that in as comprehensive a manner as possible. Not very easy in the short time given. But in the USA, your administration, led by Mr. Trump, has also given another whammy in terms of the green card suspension, a complete halt on the visa system, visa processing for Indian migrants and others. There's also the question of the HIV visas for professionals. Jobs, as the recession grows deeper in the States like in other countries, and which will lead to job retrenchment. Again, there would be a preference that will develop naturally, which will be for local Americans, perhaps, even to the extent of Caucasians. How do you react, Peter, to what will what will happen in USA, and how will the administration react to some of these issues? And the future credibility, also please comment, of the American universities who have taken large fees and are not providing ongoing classes or even online sessions at the moment. Over to you, Peter.
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. Let me just make some broad comments about the context and in which I think it makes sense to look at what's going on in the U.S. now. There are two things going on simultaneously. One, of course, is the COVID-19 pandemic, which has hit the U.S. Extremely hardly. I'll get to that in a minute. I think you all are aware of that. But the other is we're in the middle of a presidential election campaign. And immigration in general, not related to India, but in general, is a highly contentious political issue in the U.S. And it looks like it may be developing into one of the core debates that will crystallize around the November election of a new president or of a re-election of President Trump. So I would argue that it's important to look both at short-term challenges and then longer-term ones. And also, given the contentious political situation here now, that post-November, one could imagine either a continuation or even an acceleration of the policies that President Trump and his supporters have promoted, or a very substantial change if former Vice President Biden is elected in November. His orientation and that of his party, and I would say, assuming he wins, if he does win the election, a majority of Americans would be to have a pretty dramatic change in immigration policy. That again depends dramatically on the results of the November election, and in particular with regard to laws, immigration laws in the US, whether the Senate, our upper house, stays in the control of the Republicans as it is now, or whether if Biden were to become president, if the Democratic Party also won the Senate and keeps the House, which it's the majority in now, then there's a potential for actual changes in laws. And the orientation, I think, of Mr. Biden and the Democratic Party in general is to be, in a general sense, more favorable to immigration across the board, but with some caveats now. And the caveats relate back to the pandemic and the crisis, the economic crisis the US is in now. 26 million Americans have lost their jobs in 5 weeks. 26 million. And that's the number who have applied for unemployment insurance. It's probably higher than that. So you can get a sense of this is, in our system, highly dramatic. Huge. Yes, it's a huge thing. And so any political want to put primary focus on getting those Americans back into work and reopening our economy. We are, like India, very much locked down. Major aspects of our economy are not functioning now, although core functions, core governmental functions, and both at the national level and at the state level and local level continue, of course, but major sectors of the economy are essentially shut down. You mentioned earlier tourism and travel and so on. All of that is really at ground zero here now. And that impacts, we're largely, as you all know, a service economy. And so many aspects of the national scene here in the US have been very badly damaged by this pandemic. And controversial, possibly in reaction of the government to the challenge that the virus and its spread. We have lost, I think, the last number I saw yesterday was around 56,000 Americans have died in the pandemic, 56,000. A huge number have been infected, and because we don't know exactly what happens with people who have been infected and whether they become immune after surviving their infection and coping with it, either naturally or through medical intervention. We don't know if those people are now immune. We don't know for sure. The hope is that they are, as with many viruses, where once you've been infected, your body develops antibodies. But there's a huge question there then too, because we have very large numbers of people who've been infected and our testing is inadequate so far nationally. Some states are doing a better job than others, but in general, there's been a slow response to developing adequate, reliable tests for the virus. So that's another problem. So what I'm describing here is a political and economic system that is very much in crisis in different ways, and also somewhat unpredictable as to what to expect. And so stepping back for a moment and wondering about how should an Indian citizen who wishes to come to the US, either as a student or for working, how to make plans for the immediate future is very much up in the air. I don't think we can avoid that conclusion now. The good news is that even with the recent announcement by the president of 60-day sort of freeze, what we call green card issuance and visas in general, it is limited to 60 days. It probably, quite possibly could be extended, I would imagine, after the 60 days. So I think that between now and at least perhaps September, but more importantly, up to our November election, I think drawing final conclusions or even guesstimates about how to plan your life is very much up in the air. And I think it has the risks of the unknown, let's say. So those are my major points with regard to, yes. I'll pass it back to you then. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Sure.
That was also very comprehensive, given the time, which leads me on to Ambassador Navtesh Sarna. On related points, we are still in the USA in terms of your expertise, Navtesh, and you would have dealt with a lot of people there, and some of these things will be coming back to you as we move on to you. But could you also concentrate on this whole issue of professionals and HIB visas, and the whole question of jobs, and thirdly, the credibility at stake of the leading American universities? Because if the Ivy League admission meant reaching Shangri-La for a lot of Indians, that impression is getting eroded because of what is happening currently in the States. Well, let me not say more on that, but over to you. And if you could address all these, plus also what I had posed earlier to Anil. As I said, some of them relate to you as well.
Thank you very much, Raman. It's a great pleasure being here and listening to my very esteemed colleagues who've spoken before me. I think there's a great advantage in being the third speaker, because I think a lot of fundamental points have been made, ground has been covered, and I will try not to repeat that. But I think, let me just say that where Peter was leaving off, I think if there's one word which can describe this entire situation, it is uncertainty. Because this is not a usual year, it's not a usual pandemic, if there is anything like a usual pandemic. And I think the world is in a tremendous turmoil. And this is a process of adjustment that will happen, perhaps not over weeks, perhaps over years. So I think immigration is a subset of this uncertainty. And I think the student and the professional issue is an even smaller subset of this uncertainty. So I would hesitate to sort of define a paradigm for any small subset without looking at the broader uncertainty. And I think in the time available, I'll just try to make broad comments. I won't go into detail. I think the first thing we have to see is that the most countries have been not only hit on the health front, they've been hit on the economic front. So there is, for instance, in the countries like UK, United States, Canada, Australia, and these, the Western, so to speak, destinations of our immigration, I think there is hugely depressed demand. That's one thing, which is likely to continue for a long time. The second is unemployment. Peter mentioned 26 million people applying for employment benefits. I can just tell you that when I looked at this figure about 4 or 5 days ago, it was 18 million. So it has really jumped in the last, and people are losing jobs all over. It's going to happen in India, and it's happening elsewhere. And the third thing is that the health systems of all countries are under tremendous pressure. So all these three factors led together means that we don't want outsiders. We don't want more burden on our health system. We can't give jobs to our own people, so how can we give jobs to other people? This at a very basic level. In a way, this crisis is actually accelerating the trend on immigration, which we have seen since 2016, arrival of President Trump. And I get the point that Peter's making, that if there is a democratic transition or a Democrat transition, then this could change. But I think it may not change as much as it would have changed in normal circumstances. Mm-hmm. I think a certain amount of resistance to immigration is there to stay. And that is the context in which President Trump's 60-day ban on green cards, of course, there are several caveats in that. I think that has to be seen. You particularly wanted to talk of H-1B visas. I think the H-1B visa system has been a potential worry for India because Indians are the largest beneficiaries of the H-1B by any stretch. Any stretch. But the important thing is that the H-1B visas, while they are given to Indians, are not all for Indian companies. The important thing is that only about 17 or 18% of the H-1B visas actually go into Indian companies working in the United States. Most of them go to big behemoths like Facebook, Google, Amazon, etc., where Indians have gone and actually helped make those companies globally competitive. So that has to be kept in mind. So far, there has been, sort of not an attack on the H-1B system. There has been a tightening of the systems. There were some abuses in the system which have been tightened up. How this will go in the future, let me come to that in a minute. I think there is going to be several trends which are quite obvious. One of them is going to be regaining of economic sovereignty. Given the fact that you don't want your supply lines, as Anil mentioned, stretched all the way to China, the unreliability that is involved there, a lot of countries are going to go for economic sovereignty. Let's make our own masks, for instance. I'm just giving an example,
Yeah.
but in everything. Now, which country can actually do this all on their own, or which country will need professionals and which country will be able to supply those professionals? I think that will be the critical thing. For instance, if you see President Trump's executive order, there is a caveat that anybody coming for health work or nurses or doctors or helping with COVID, they will be allowed. So there's already a caveat there. So if in the coming years you are going to help countries regain economic security, I think your professionals will still be welcome. I think the other aspect is going to be how much investment you're going to be able to take. For instance, countries like Australia, countries like Canada, and these are aging societies, low birth rates, low populations. They want people, and if you people go there and also take money, I think that is going to be ultimately be welcome. Of course, in the short run, I think all this is on hold. You used to have 800,000 international flights a week, carrying 100 million travelers, whether for tourism or for work or for meetings or for conferences. That's all on hold. So definitely about 180 countries have put in travel restrictions. That's going to have an impact on short-term movement, whether it's for migration or for study or for tourism or for anything. That is a given. But I am now talking over things when things begin to stabilize a bit. Let me quickly come to your subset of students.
Yeah, because we need to wind up.
Yeah, I think you need to wind up. I think the universities are not going to let their name get tarnished so easily. I think a lot of the universities are already offering deferments. They are offering people online studies for at least 6 months. Most of the big universities have allowed people, not turned out people, some have actually, including Harvard, and said, please go home. Now, of course, that brings in the whole problem of how do they go home when there are no flights? And where do they go? But a lot of universities, I think once the immediate shock goes, they will move to protect their integrity, they protect their reputation. And also, the UK, for instance, the international students are a huge source of money. The universities are under huge pressure. There's going to be an estimated loss of £2.5 billion to the university sector, a lot of which is due to an expected fall in international students. So sooner or later, they'll try to square this. So I'll stop here. I know you need to take questions. So
Thank you very, very much. Yes, the current worry, as Anil had also referred to it, was what about the students who are stuck there and the parents, worried about how do we get them out? But that's something let's hope gets resolved in the right way. There are some questions, as I can see, that are developing. But at this point in time, thank you very, very much for the very succinct answers that you could come up with, given the time constraints. And I think we've been able to cover a lot. With those words, I'm going to hand it over to Himanshu again to take on the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sidhu. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the fantastic insights that you've shared over such a burning issue right now. I'm sure people have benefited a lot from this discussion. However, whatever remains should be covered in the questions that we've received from some of the people who are watching this live. So my first question is from one of our attendees who's mentioned that thank you for your time today. My question specifically relates to immigration to countries such as UK, Canada and Australia. What is the panel's opinion for immigration to these countries specifically? A very interesting question indeed, I must say, because India has a lot of diaspora in Canada and Australia, and a lot of people are working in Europe as well. So I think this question particularly relates to what are we seeing? I'm sure some of the ground has already been covered in our discussion, but talking specifically in terms of professionals who are wanting to move abroad and in terms of students who are willing to study abroad. what is the future, what is in it for them in the future. So I think, Mr. Wadhwa, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, let me start. Okay, so let me say that partly this question has been answered already, but I'd like to say that there are, if you look at the executive order of United States, like Navtej mentioned, you have some exceptions over there. And at the moment, countries who are facing a difficulty with regard to their own nationals finding jobs, obviously you will look at the exceptional areas. So we are in times right now where we have to pass this period, get over it, and then we can look at what can open up. But at the moment, I see that the preference of these countries would be only for the sectors in which there is need, specifically the health sector, for example. People who are specialists, and who can help the country in terms of need, who don't take away jobs of those who already lost them, because those people have to be accommodated as well. So obviously the focus is on those. But I would place Australia and Canada in a little different category than the United States here. Um, why? Because there is inherent shortage and gaps in the economy which need to be filled. Not at the moment because there's no travel around. So once travel opens up, then the needs will remain the same. I don't see that going away. And there are certain sectors, like especially in the IT industry, for example, for Australia, where there is a huge gap. And again, IT enabled services, there's a huge gap. And then, of course, there are these specialized, facility management, for instance, is a very big field in Australia. There is a large scope for countries who can provide manpower, who are trained manpower for these services, and trained, plumbers, electricians who got certified through courses which are recognized in Australia. So I'm quite hopeful that those will continue to be open. At the same time, in aging populations like Canada, which Navtej also mentioned, I think there are certain gaps there which will continue for the foreseeable future. But all this depends on how quickly we can get back to a little semblance of normalcy.
Very well answered. Very well answered, Ambassador Wadhwa. I mean, I'm sure I'm sure whoever has asked this question, the name of the person is not mentioned here, unfortunately, has the question answered. Thank you so much for that. My next question is pertaining to the Gulf region, because Gulf region is, something where a lot of Indian diaspora, specifically from South India, has, very strong connections with, and they usually go there as construction workers in the construction sector itself. So my question, this question is from Mr. Arjun Yadav, and Arjun is asking that what future trends do you see with respect to immigration to and return immigration from the Gulf, particularly those working in the construction sector? Master Sarna, would you like to take this question?
Well, I think rightly this question should be answered by Anil. Yes. I could have taken the previous one, but this one is Anil's. Yes.
Let me just take that again. And yes, I think construction in particular is a depressed sector right now in the Gulf. I already mentioned when I was speaking that there is there's a certain apprehension about which activities would catch on in the Gulf, given the nature of what has happened in the economies after the oil prices have got depressed. So obviously there will have to be priorities in the economies. These policies will change, and how much construction is to be continued, because there was already a depression in the market, but the Gulf economies saw this as a good way of making sure that the economy kept ticking. So new projects kept on coming up in the hope that in future demand would pick up. So this trend has been continuing for a number of years now. But after this, break which the pandemic will give the economy, I think there would be a chance for the economies to reassess where they're going and where they should concentrate on. At the moment, I don't see construction picking up in a very large way. Only the essential projects will be completed. And that is where I see that a lot of Indian workers, unfortunately, will not be required, especially those who are not specialized.
Okay. So, Arjun, I could really hope this. I would really hope Ambassador Wadhwa has answered your query, and very well answered indeed. My next question is, I think this is for Ambassador Burley here, and this is a question from a student, I guess. The name of the person is Siddharth, and Siddharth is asking that is this a good time to enroll in a program starting sometime in September this year, considering that the student will complete the program a year down the line? Will things be better from an employment standpoint or permanent residency standpoint? So, your thoughts on this, Ambassador Burley?
Well, I'm not surprised at the question, but I don't have a really authoritative response for it. I think we're too much up in the air. Siddhartha, is that the name? I sympathize with your dilemma if you're talking about a personal choice you have to make now. I think the best of my understanding is that most of the universities in the U.S. Will certainly be functioning in the September semester, but many of them will be doing their functioning online and, as was referred to earlier, long-distance learning. There's a major debate going on within educational circles and public health circles in the U.S. now as to whether it would be safe to bring large numbers of students together on traditional campuses and have them in traditional classrooms where they're very close together. And I think as of right now, I'd be very cautious about expecting traditional education in most of the universities to be in place as early as this September. They certainly all want to go back to that model. That's what their whole system is based on. It's not based on online learning, except for a few educational institutions here. And the strong motivation from the university side would be to go back to that model. But I think it's highly questionable whether this September they will be able to do that.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Ambassador Burley. I think my next question is from Mr. Praveen Gupta, and I am sorry because we have a lot of questions right now. I don't think we have enough time to answer each and every one of them. So I'll just close the question answer session very soon. The next question is for Ambassador Sarna here, and the name of the person is Mr. Praveen Gupta. Mr. Gupta is asking that the US is the most preferred long-term migration destination. Rest are somewhere lower in the order. What could be the emerging scenario as of now? And a very interesting question because US has always been a dream destination for many people, students and professionals alike. So given the current scenario where US is one of the most affected around the world, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think the great American dream is not going to change, and hopefully will get all its colors back in the years to come. But I think for any potential immigrants, and I'm not talking here of students, I'm talking of professionals, I think they'd have to be very careful as to what they are going for. They should make sure of their sponsorships in advance and their future prospects in advance, because I think in the near to medium term, the immigration scenario is going to remain tough. And it's going to remain even tougher if President Trump is re-elected. But in any case, it's going to remain tough. And I don't mean simply in terms of getting a job and holding on. I also want to say that there is also a cultural context. There is also a thing of Indians going and working in small towns in America. Or any other foreigner for that matter. So this thing of people coming here to take my job away is going to be there for a while. So I would say that please choose with care and only go if you really think that you have the backing of the companies that you're going to work with. And if you really, it's not all going to be, a bed of roses.
Beautifully answered, Ambassador Sarna. I really hope Mr. Gupta has got his answer. We have a question for.
I wonder if Peter agrees with that.
Yeah, just one second. Because
Peter agrees with what I said.
I think Peter wanted to say something.
Yes.
Just one moment.
Yes, Ambassador Burley. My apologies.
Well, I very much agree with what you said, and might even go further that getting back to my point about the politics of immigration in the US, again, not related directly to India at all, for that matter, is that there's been a general trend in the US, and I gather from reading that the same is true in Western Europe and perhaps in some other of the Anglophone countries. There's been a general pullback from the large-scale, very conventional appreciation of and support for immigration in the US. And that is not just limited to one side of our political division here in the US. It's broadly speaking, and that was before this pandemic. That was, I think, looking back, I think you can see that a good part of Mr. Trump's support during the 2016 election against Hillary Clinton was his position on immigration, which was basically just negative about it from all sources. Anybody, he wanted to basically stop it if he could, and that got a lot of political support and resonance in the American public, enough to get him elected anyway.
Yes.
So I think I generally certainly agree with the cautionary note about expecting somehow that only because of the election in November will things dramatically go back to the way they were. People here talk about the, quote, new normal, which is not a return to the old normal, but some new attitudes and legal and social and educational structures that are going to be different as a result of what the country has been going through the last several years.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ambassador Burley. So the next question is from Shubham, and this question, although is pertaining to a particular case which Shubham is asking, I think I'll broaden the scope of this question, and this question can be answered by this question specifically is for Mr. Sidhu, and Shubham is asking that Mr. Sidhu has experience from Canada to Europe, and what do you think? Talking about internationally, when do you think that the international travel is going to resume? Because there are a lot of people stuck in different places. Some students who are unable to return back home, some professionals who are unable to get back to their homes. What do you feel like? When do you think the international travel will get back to normal?
Well, Shubham, I was an investment banker, not a money markets or a forward market specialist. Even currency specialists will not try and forecast beyond a certain period in good times. And I think you're asking me to predict beyond that. We are all hoping that some sense of normalcy returns at the earliest possible. But I do not see any larger scale travel start for at least the next 5 to 6 months from now. That is my gut feeling. It will be very, very gradual. And as I said, that this period of uncertainty used by Navtej and the process of adjustment will take that much time, because the economic travails that will start emerging after the health issues, the safety issues of human lives, they get sorted out, and that will take at least that much of time to start addressing in any sensible manner before people can even embark on more ambitious programs, including of travel. I know it does not quite answer Shubham's question, but that is how the situation looks to me at the moment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sidhu. I really appreciate your answer and really appreciate your honest response to this thing. I think I have just time for one last question, and then we'll call it a day. It's
been nearly 40% of the participants have a question from the looks of it, which is way above normal. So back to you, Himanshu.
No. I'm sure because people have so much going on in their minds that, and this is an unparalleled opportunity for them to connect to experts and directly hear from them about what the future holds for them. So I'm sure they are really looking forward to this session. But yes, my last question, and a very interesting one indeed, is from once again Mr. Praveen Gupta, who's asking that what happens to the U.S. position on fossil fuel, even though the Trump administration is benign to the, he uses the word dirty energy sector. So, Ambassador Murli, this is for you, I think.
Well, I think you all know that the U.S. had become a major oil producer over the last decade, and in particular the last 3 or 4 years, so that the whole industry has become a very important one here in the U.S., and the U.S. is now exporting what it used to import. But the recent crisis in the oversupply of oil internationally has had a very damaging impact on the U.S. economy. That's another dimension of it, especially in the state of Texas, but more broadly than that. So Mr. Trump, I'm not speaking on behalf of Mr. Trump, of course, but his orientation has been to sustain traditional sources of energy, and to the extent that in his perception that some of them are declining unacceptably, he talks about reinvesting in the old industries such as coal, and in addition to the oil question and the fracking techniques that are very widespread now in the US and in Canada. But I think most people that I'm familiar with, anyway, most opinion is that those old industries, those old conventional energy industries are things of the past, not the oil industry. That I think most people think it will, certainly in the short term, meaning the next 10 years or so, continue to play a very substantial role in energy, both here in the US and internationally. So if the point of the question is, will the US be promoting new sources of energy like solar and wind power and so on, I think under Mr. Trump, the answer is no, that will not be a priority. Under a different administration, it would be more of a priority. There's more of an openness to exploring new sources of energy.
Before we move on, I would like Mr. Sidhu to conclude the session.
Thank you, Himanshu, and a very big thank you to the esteemed panelists, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, Ambassador Peter Burley, Ambassador Natej Sana, for finding time to be with us today, and for a big thank you to Speakin to organize quite energetic in terms of the involvement of the listeners and the speakers session today. All very relevant. We will continue to traverse through this period of uncertainty, but let us hope that there is a new awakening that will await all of us across the globe, and things get better, and we start getting back to a normal, whether it's a new normal or parts of the old normal, but at the earliest possible.
And to all our panelists here, I would like to extend on behalf of Speaking Team and on behalf of all the attendees who are present here, my heartiest gratitude to you for joining us today. Thank you so much for your very, very, very precious time. I'm sure all the attendees who have joined us today have taken some very important lessons, some very important learnings from this session. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us once again.